Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters on KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 10 a.m. Got a great show lined up for you today. Career motivation differs from person to person. Perhaps you're driven by a challenge, have a lifelong dream to work in a particular field, want to earn the highest income you can, but for some, the greatest motivation in his or her career is knowing their work can make a positive impact on society. Our topic today is jobs to make a difference in 2017, and we will be talking with Kyle Kensing, employment expert with CareerCast. So please stay tuned. Keep listening. Kyle will be joining us very, very shortly to do a deep dive into this topic. But if you are a longtime listener, you know we always use the first few minutes of the show to tell you just a little bit about what's going on here in the Houston and the Gulf Coast region when it comes to financial literacy and financial awareness. I do want to mention that this week we actually kicked off, you've heard me talk about Houston Money Week before. Houston Money Week is the local Houston representation of Financial Literacy Month. That is a national awareness month that takes place every single year. The Houston representation of that is Houston Money Week, and even though it's called Houston Money Week, it takes place over the entire month of April and sometimes even bleeding over into May. It started out with just a week, and now it's grown bigger and bigger each and every year that I've been a part of it. As a member of the leadership team, we actually started our first leadership meeting for 2018 this week. So we had a meeting over at the Federal Reserve this week to talk about 2018 and what is up and coming. And something to note, this is actually the 10-year anniversary of Houston Money Week. So some of the things that we talked about were kind of acknowledging that milestone, that kind of a celebration of 10 years of successful financial literacy events across Houston. As you know, if you've heard me talk about this before, Houston Money Week is a initiative for-profits, nonprofits, local city governments, all banding together to bring financial literacy to low, moderate, really all income classes free and to you near where you live geographically. If you go to the website houstonmoneyweek.org, when we are having the event, you can type in your zip code and it will tell you an event. Even things like tax preparation are things that fall into that realm and that scope. So I'd encourage you, as even though we are here in August of 2017, it sounds early, it's one of these things that as you get started and you get going and you plan for it and you get ramped up, it's here and over before you even know it. To find out more, if you are interested in becoming a part of it and finding out how you can help, or even just going to any of these classes that we have during the month of April, you can visit houstonmoneyweek.org. And with that, let's go ahead and get Kyle on the line here so we can make sure to have the most time available to speak with him. Kyle, are you there?
I am.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned a little bit at the beginning of the show, kind of our topic today, jobs that make a difference in 2017. But I always kind of start the show the same way. I'd like to, I mentioned that you are with CareerCast, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself so that we can get to know you a little bit better?
Yeah, so I'm the online content editor at CareerCast.com. And over at CareerCast, we specialize in jobs, news, market information, and we're also a job search engine portal. So if you're an active job seeker, we've got jobs out there for you. And so I've worked in journalism and media for about a decade now, and have been with CareerCast for about 5 years.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to dive right in because you mentioned we're going to talk about different types of careers and things that you can do to make a difference. But I know here locally in the Houston area, as of 2-3 years ago, we had massive layoffs in the oil industry, and we've had somewhat of a recovery in that area. But recently in healthcare, which is a big part of our local economy, we had a local hospital layoff about 300 employees here. So I know that this is an area of interest. And you mentioned that it's a job search portal, so that we might kind of touch on some of those areas that would help job seekers in the healthcare profession as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And with healthcare, that's a sector that has been such a major backbone of our economy, pretty much for the entire 20th and 21st centuries, but really was one of the few industries that saw growth even during the Great Recession. So even if there's temporary layoffs in a region, nationally the trend has always been continued growth, especially over the last few years as more people have had access to healthcare.
Absolutely. I totally agree. In fact, when we here locally in Houston, when we experienced the downturn in the oil market, one of our saving graces there was the healthcare industry, as we felt it was a level of insulation from the downtick in the oil market, and I know a lot of people went that way. Well, let's start with, I'm looking at something that came out from CareerCast called Jobs to Make a Difference in 2017. Can you tell me a little bit about this?
Yeah, so some background on this is every year in the spring we release what we call our main jobs rated report, and that's a snapshot of about 200 different jobs spanning a wide variety of sectors, where we try to evaluate on things that don't vary from industry to industry to find out what the best jobs of each given year are. And the factors that we look at are things like salary, potential growth of salary, the hiring outlook, and things like stress and environment. And one of the things that we've done the last couple of years is we've actually polled our readers to find out what interests them as far as what they look for in a job. And what I found interesting was one of the top things that our readers responded was that they want to get into jobs where they can make a difference in other people's lives or the community around them. So this is the first time we had done this report where we looked at jobs where you can make some sort of difference, whether it's on people's health or serving the community directly or even something like working with animals, which are some opportunities that people really are interested in based on the research that we've done by asking our readers.
So I love that. You mentioned working with animals. What other types of jobs did you see come up when you did this research that kind of filled that sense of value for people to be able to give back?
Well, obviously working with the community is a big one, and those are jobs that are kind of self-explanatory. If you are a police officer or a firefighter, you're working directly with the community to make a positive impact on people. And in that kind of same community service vein, one that might not necessarily jump out, but that's really high growth and really important to the community is actually EMT. That was one where, because of the growth outlook, is a great opportunity, and you're also making a real positive impact on your community. So community service was one of the factors we looked at. Healthcare was one of the factors that we considered here, and environment and nature as well, which obviously right now is a topic of high interest to a lot of people, and there's a lot of different and kind of unique opportunities there to have a significant positive impact on not just your community but the whole world.
Absolutely. I'm thinking back to the environmental law when Volkswagen was kind of doing some craziness when it came to the environmental regulations there, and that was one of the catalysts of seeking environmental legislation. So there's different arms that reach out. It could be law, it could be regulatory stuff. Health, you talked about that. You talked about the EMTs, which may not be the first thing that pops into someone's head when they think about community service. You think about police, firefighters, but this is a healthcare related that is always needed in the community there. What other careers came up when you looked at this research?
So going to the environmental impact, some of the jobs that stood out there, environmental engineer is one that's really high growth and really high paying as well. And this is an interesting one, I think, if you're a student or somebody who's looking to change careers and restart your education to change careers, because I think the environmental engineers are going to be of really high importance here in the next 10 to 15 years. And that's a job where you can work in a lot of different sectors. You know, you might hear the word environmental engineer and you're like, what can I really do with that? Well, if you think of something like an office park, for example, a lot of times the companies that are building out those office parks will contract with environmental engineers to have best practices as far as eliminating their carbon footprint as much as possible, making it as eco-friendly as possible a workplace for, you know, whether it's a tech company or some other kind of business. So I think that's a really fascinating one. And then meteorologists. And this is one that when we published it, we got some interesting questions because people hear meteorologist and you think, you know, somebody who appears on TV and gives the weather, but it's really so much more than that. You know, it's and obviously there in the Gulf region, people understand the importance of knowing ahead of time weather impacts. If you have something like a hurricane coming around, how important that can be to be properly prepared for that as a community.
Oh yeah, we didn't even have a hurricane this week. We just had heavy rains, and it ended up getting another round of flooding, which we are no stranger to here. So the idea of a meteorologist, someone plugged in, telling us kind of to be on the lookout for those types of things, hugely valuable to the community.
Absolutely, yeah. I grew up in an area with flash flooding in the summertime from monsoon season, so it was always important to have those warnings to not be out on the roads when one of those was coming.
What tips would you give somebody who was looking to get into either, we mentioned community service, we mentioned health, we mentioned some of these environmental and nature, environmental engineering, that sort of thing. What kind of tips would you give for job seekers who are looking to go that route?
Well, I think if this is something that you're interested in, obviously the first thing is you want to find out the level of qualification that's necessary. And this is true of any job, of course, but you want to have more than the minimum, if at all possible, which means whether it means getting some more education with the availability of online courses now, there's more opportunity to extend your education than ever before. But at the same time, you might also consider volunteering in some capacity in one of these fields. One, to add to your resume, but two, to find out if this is really for you. Because if you just jump in cold and leave another career field for something that, you know, you think you're going to be passionate about and it turns out that you're just miserable doing, then, you know, you obviously want to avoid that as much as possible. And the great thing is that there are a lot of opportunities either to volunteer or to get firsthand experience to kind of see what the job's all about. You know, something like education, we talked a little bit about education in this report. You know, elementary school, high school teachers make a huge impact on the communities around them. And there's opportunity to volunteer at a school to find out if that's really for you. In that same vein, if you want to be something like a social and community manager, something like the manager of your local Boys and Girls Club, those sort of organizations are always looking for volunteers to help out. So it's a great way to kind of stick your toes in to find out if that's the right career change that you want to make. And something like police officer, too, if you're thinking of going through that rigorous process of going through the academy, you can always find out about taking a ride-along with your local department if they do that sort of thing.
So I'm going to, if you're driving right now, don't feel like you have to get a pen out because there is the podcast version, and we're going to have a link to the website, which is www.careercast.com. But on that website, this is called Jobs to Make a Difference in 2017. One of the things I'm seeing on here is that there's an actual a median income range for the different jobs that come up on that, and I think that's important when people are making decisions. The other thing I'm going to kind of unpack some of the stuff that you just talked about. You mentioned the job qualifications. If you do see a field that you're interested in, making sure that you have at least the minimum requirements, if it's a degree or if it's a certification, whatever that is, that's part of you doing your due diligence and finding out this resource, this report that's on careercast.com. I think this is excellent because it's going to show an income level, as well as the different types of jobs that are there. You talked about education a little bit, or the field of education, teaching. I know here the other one besides the medical field or the healthcare profession right now is that we have had a local our state university do some layoffs as well, as they're going through some transition and changing things around. What other careers came up on this that might have surprised us?
I think one that's sort of surprising is funeral director, just because you kind of hear that, and that might not necessarily, you don't think of the positive impact that can have. But if you've ever lost somebody close to you, you understand the importance of that time, having that kind of comfort when you have that kind of farewell ceremony for a loved one. And funeral director was an interesting job prospect because the annual median pay is pretty high at around $55,000. To get started, you only need about minimum associate's degree or so. And that's a job where, again, as I mentioned, you don't necessarily think of the positive impact that it can have on your community, but it's really sort of profound if you've ever been in that, unfortunate time in life. You understand the importance of somebody who's thoughtful and caring and meticulous about that whole process. And that's a great career if you do want to make an impact on your community.
I agree 100%. I would just piggyback on that. And my wife's grandmother, before she passed away, she entered into hospice care. And as difficult of a time that was for us, the care and tenderness that the time that they took at the hospice care to meet with the family, to prepare the family, and to take care of her in that moment, that made a huge difference for us. And it is one that may not be on your radar, but that is a huge one, and it's number 7 on the list here that I'm looking at. Tell us a little bit more about what other types of careers came up on this.
Well, when you mentioned hospice care, home health aide was one, and of the 200 jobs that we tracked in the Jobs Rated report for 2017, at 38%, home health aide was the highest growth outlook. And part of the reason that is such a high growth field right now, one is the baby boomer generation aging, getting a little bit older and needing some more care in the home, but not necessarily needing to be at full-time residency facilities. So home health aides can come in and do a lot to help around the house to, make an older person's life a lot more manageable. But at the same time, one of the things with people having more access to healthcare in recent years, they've also had more access to home health. If you have something come up where you don't necessarily need to be at the doctor's office, but still need a little bit of day-to-day assistance, if you're somebody who's diabetic who maybe needs some help with your insulin, that sort of thing, if you're a young child, and it's difficult to get your kid from, school to karate to whatever else that they might be doing, a home health aide can really kind of help with some of those day-to-day health practices that you need to maintain yourself. And that's part of the reason that home health aide is such a high growth field and really is important, because that does encompass, as you mentioned, with something like hospice, it encompasses that as well as just helping people with their day-to-day lives. So that's one that made our list here. And another in healthcare that's pretty fascinating is dietitian, because we've heard a lot about obesity, the obesity rate in the United States. Curtailing that is such a huge part of the overall healthcare outlook. Dietitians are hugely important, and that's a great career field. You're talking about an annual median income of nearly $60,000. Whereas other healthcare professions, sometimes you need postgraduate education. That's not necessarily the case with dietitians. So it's a job with a accessible starting point. I think that's a great field, one you might not necessarily think of as having a huge impact on your community, but when you consider the high rates of obesity and that ability to help somebody improve their health, I think is really can't be overstated.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more there. When we talk about financial literacy, there is a correlation between health and your finances, and we've made that correlation many times on this show before, but something like a dietitian, somebody who is looking to prevent metabolic syndrome, diabetes, stress, disease, that sort of thing, there is a dollar sign attached to that, not just for that individual or for that person, but for the entire country. The amount of money and resources that go into preventing things that could be prevented up front if you have a healthy diet, and so that you can see the need for that and what kind of good that would bring into the community by helping people with the dietitian stuff. I'm going to go back just a little bit when you talked about the home health care. You talked about the baby boomer generation, and I know on the finance side that there are something like 10,000 baby boomers reaching Social Security age every hour, and it's going to be that way for the next 20 years. So that is a huge, if you want to talk about job safety, and you're talking about numbers, you know that there are healthcare needs surrounding people who are aging. There's inflation that comes with healthcare expenses and medication and that sort of thing. But often you'll hear people say, I don't want to leave my house. I want to stay at my house. I want to do as much as I've lived here for years. I want to stay here and do as much in my home as I can. But none of us are healthcare professionals. So to have a trained nurse or somebody come into the home to build ramps, to do things to assist, that's not going away. That's only going to get bigger. So that one to me seems like a very important one. What other things do you want to tell our listeners about this report?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this is really came about because of reader feedback, and people want to make a difference in their jobs, and I think that really is an interesting that is an interesting insight, I believe, into the job seeker mentality. You know, because we hear a lot about salary potential and how stable is our career going to be, and those are certainly important factors. But I thought it was interesting that so many of our readers said that they want jobs where they can make a positive impact on other people. I think it shows where people's motivations lay, and I think it shows where their hearts and heads lay. You know, I mean, sometimes in our world it can be easy to lose sight of that, you know, if you're just have tunnel vision and that sort of thing, but that people really do want to kind of reach out and make a difference. And in compiling this report, it was interesting to see of the 200 jobs that we track, how many can make an impact and how many do so in such different ways. You know, where we talk is something as far-ranging as this report as meteorologist to home health aide. You know, it's a pretty big difference in what those jobs are, but it shows that no matter what your passion is, chances are there's a job out there in your industry or in your line of work where you can make a huge positive impact in the world around you.
So I think that's very important. If you think about even going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you think about people, then when I do financial planning, we look at that, and people cover, you know, food, shelter, warmth, and you think of income. They're you know, maybe they're going to try to go for the highest dollar there. But when we start talking about things that make a positive impact, things that give people value and meaning in their lives, these things could be much bigger than a price tag. The other thing is often somebody will look for that highest income, and that may not represent what's actually going to make them feel good in life. And what I mean by that is sometimes there's stress. If you don't feel like you're doing making a positive impact out there, you may not be that happy, even though you're chasing the bigger dollar signs there on the income. The second thing I want to say about that is looking at some of the salaries on here. For these, there is income out there. When you talk about environmental engineer, you talk about positions like that. There are well-paying jobs that kind of go together with this. So, you know, KPFT, the radio station we're on right now, we're a nonprofit. I work a lot in the nonprofit field. So, yeah, I think one of the first things that pops into people's heads when they start thinking about this stuff is the nonprofit world. But there are other careers out there that also will help you make a positive impact as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the thing too. When I mentioned people not necessarily focusing on income as their motivation for a job, I mean, yeah, obviously some of these that made the list are low paying. Something like an animal care worker, is just a little north of $22,000 annually. Certainly not great pay. Now, that's also one with a low entry point as far as your certification and education required. The more education that you have for one of these fields, obviously, the more you're going to be able to make. Something like a meteorologist, it's a highly specialized scientific field. Annual median income is almost $93,000. So you can still make a positive impact on the world and make pretty decent money as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I know we're right now the word environment there's a lot of geopolitical stuff going on but up until recently, the idea of green builds here in Houston, we have local initiatives to sustainable green builds is a thing, and when I say it's a thing, I think it's a progressive thing that we should move forward with. So I would not curtail any, even with what's going on lately, I would not curtail any of the stuff that's going towards the environment. I think it's great, and we need to keep it up. And the other thing is that when we go back to education, you mentioned people working with the youth and families, and this is one of the biggest things that somebody can do for our society. These are our kids going on to get into careers and doing things, and the people that we put in front of them. This can have some of the greatest impact out there in the community right away.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and that's one of the reasons that there's 3 different jobs on this report that address specifically working with kids in some capacity, whether it's as a teacher or as a social worker or a social and community manager, which is an interesting one to me because that's one with high annual median income of about $65,000, high growth outlook at about 10%. And it's part of the reason I have a personal connection to it. When I was in college, I actually worked as a Boys and Girls Club counselor. And it's really a neat job because it's one where you are having a positive impact on kids. And you hear the mantra of paying it forward. You know, I know every year at Christmas time there's the movement to pay for the coffee for the person behind you in line. Well, you know, why not make something like that a career where you're teaching kids to always continuously pay it forward in some way or another? You know, if you're educating them so that they have a positive impact on the world, you're leaving a long-lasting legacy, you know, in your community and beyond. And I think that's part of the reason that jobs that work in either education or directly with children and families are really so important, and I think deserve a lot more attention and adulation, you know, as a society.
Couldn't agree more with you on that. I absolutely agree. Some of the most intelligent people who are skilled in organizational development I have met have been in the nonprofit world. And this is something that, when it comes to education, and that we need to apply more resources to this area. There is the idea that people they'll get compassion fatigue, and every year people will ask you to do more on less of a budget. So I think the idea of getting the right people in these positions is huge. Kyle, we are right here, bumping towards the end of the show. Is there something that you want to tell our listeners that I have forgot to ask you about?
I don't believe so, but just to kind of reiterate my point, I think that with a lot of these jobs, there's great opportunity to volunteer. And so if you're thinking of one of these kind of careers where you might be able to make a positive impact, certainly go out and volunteer, because even if you find out the job isn't right for you, the hours that you put in are still going to have some kind of positive impact on somebody else's life. So that's, I think, the number one thing I would advise on this.
You know, I would say that would be unique to many of these positions, because a lot of careers you don't have the ability to go test drive.
Exactly.
You can't go take it out for a spin, but a lot of these organizations you can join up as a volunteer, and that may network you or lead you into a full-time professional career doing the thing that you love to do.
Exactly, yeah. Your local TV station isn't going to let you anchor the news for one night, but some of these other jobs are going to let you have that opportunity to kind of see if it's right for you.
Absolutely. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to find out more about Kyle, we're going to have a link to careercast.com on the podcast. Kyle, have a great weekend, and thank you for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And you have been listening to KPFT Houston.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.